Black Enterprise presents the 40 Under 40 honorees in sports, athletes, sports officials, and history makers. Jason Wright, president of the Washington football team. Kyrie Irving, NBA player, philanthropist, and social justice advocate. Maia Shaka, NFL's first black female official. Naomi Osaka, tennis player, entrepreneur, and activist. Bubba Wallace, NASCAR driver and social activist. For more information on all of our honorees, log on to blackenterprise.com/40 under 40.
Everyone, and welcome. My name is Imani Ellis, and I'm the CEO and founder of CultureCon and the Creative Collective NYC. Today, we're going to be talking about the keys to building a winning personal brand. I'm joined by Angelina Darrisaw, C-suite coach, and Troy Clare, head of strategic partnerships, public policy at Amazon. How are you all?
Doing well.
Thank you for having us.
I want to dive right in. Angelina, how do you describe a personal brand?
When I think of a personal brand, I think of something that drives value and you can easily associate what that value is with that person. So for example, when I think of Beyonce, I think of she is so good and talented. I will spend my rent money on concert tickets every single time, right? So that's what comes to mind. And we actually have a framework that we use with employees from various companies across industries. And that framework is all about 3 Ps. So the 3 Ps begin with first, thinking of what's your profit factor? What do you do so well that people associate that value with you? They'll pay you for it consistently. It will always keep money in your pocket. So your profit factor, that's the first P. The second P is the perception. When you come to mind, when people think of you, do they identify that profit factor with you? Can they easily see the value? Do they know what you're really strong at and how you bring value to the bottom line or to your organization? And then that last P is people. You also need people in your network to amplify you and to be sharing and telling the story of what you do really well. So all 3 work together to help you build that brand where you're constantly able to drive value back to your clients, if you're a business owner, or your organization, if you're working within a company.
I love that, the 3 Ps. I feel like, strategies like that really help you develop these takeaways when you're walking away from the conversation. Troy, I want to ask you the same question. How do you define a personal brand?
Well, really, a brand is about telling your story, and really a short story. And the key to that personal brand, Imani, is really about being authentic, right? You have to explain to people, how are you a problem solver? And so I have a little device that I use about building my story. One is about how do people get to know you? And when I say that, I say, how do you know what your values are? And how do you know how you add value? And so those 2 things together really get to help you to understand yourself. And then the second thing is to teach others about you. And this is really important because a lot of times people just say their title, but they don't talk about their talent. And so teaching others about you really says that when you describe me to another person, you can really talk about my strengths. And so get to know you and teach others about you and tell that authentic story. And I think that's how you really get started with building your personal brand.
I love that, bringing it back to storytelling, and not just storytelling, but authentic storytelling, so that it really resonates. COVID has dramatically changed how we interact with each other. How has the pandemic increased the need to establish a winning digital footprint?
So there's a lot of transitions that are happening right now. Folks are starting businesses. There's lots of new businesses that are being launched. There are also shifts in priorities, and more folks are looking for remote work opportunities, places where they can feel safe at work. So there's a lot of transition happening. And a strong personal brand helps you through those transitions because people see maybe you didn't have the exact experience that might have been required in a job description or to build a certain business, but you're bringing these transferable skills and they know who you are. They know you deliver results. They know that you're constantly delivering value. And if they see that, it can help a lot with transitions. So when I think about a strong personal brand in a time like this, it can help you move from one opportunity to the next because people believe in you and they're going to invest in you when you're making a shift in your career or to launch a new business.
I think that's great. And I would add to that, right, that writing becomes so much more important because you're not necessarily able to communicate as much in person. And so some people talk about an elevator pitch, which I think that's a little outdated. But I have a system that I suggest, right, it's really two parts. One is talking about what you do best, right? So in one sentence, you would communicate what you do best. And then the second sentence is a testimonial. In other words, it's an example, right? So if you say, I help small businesses with limited budgets grow their social media followers, that's what you do best. And a testimonial would say, this past year, I've helped 20 businesses grow their revenue by $30,000. So when you talk about what you do best and followed up by a testimonial, it's really impactful. And so people, again, can really be advocates for you and teach others about you.
And Troy, I want to ricochet actually back to you because I think that's a great point in terms of what do you do best? How can you use your personal brand to land you a job?
Yeah, that's a great question because I really think people think branding is something you need to do as a business, but it's also something that you need to do in your work as well. And I think about what I call the brand products. The brand products include your resume and of course your cover letter, but also the interview itself when you're communicating that brand in person. The other piece is your LinkedIn. And I know that some people think that that's just something you throw a picture up in a couple words and you're done, but you really need to be thoughtful about LinkedIn. And then the other piece is what I talked about before is what are other people going to say about you? So it's not just your references, but it's people who you know. Can your friend describe what you do best? Can your mom describe it? Can your cousin describe it, right? And so it's really about saying, having a common voice, your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, in your interview, and what I call ambassadors, right? People who are going to talk about you. And so if you have all of those things communicating the same brand, then you'll be more successful in your search.
I love it. And so Angelina, we've used Troy's tips to get the job, but then how can you use your personal brand once you've gotten the job?
So many thoughts there. And I definitely want to talk to the folks that are internal within organizations, but I also think that what Troy shared speaks so much to business owners as well. And I want to highlight that. Recently, I was with Black Enterprise chatting with Selena Hill about getting to that 7-figure mark through a divorce and a pandemic and managing all that. And we have some lofty goals for my business, and we've been doing a lot of cold pitching. And I took a step and looked at the last 6 years, and I realized every single opportunity we've ever gotten has come through person-to-person referrals. So instead of doing this cold pitching, I had to sit down and reevaluate if we're going to hit that next goal. We have to leverage our network. And so that's especially relevant now as we're not meeting in person in the same way that we used to. And this works for both business owners and for anyone working within an organization. When we talked about brand earlier and I shared that framework, I talked about P, that people factor. And we sometimes think if we just sit down and do the work, the opportunities will come. Well, yes, you have to do the work. Don't forget the other P is that profit factor. That means the results you're delivering. Cannot, discount that in any way. But if people don't know the work you're doing and you're not coming top of mind when they're thinking about the next opportunity, then you're missing an opportunity. So no matter how busy you are, how bogged down you get in work, you have to carve out that intentional time to build your network and rely on the people. So you've gotten the job or you've gotten the client if you're a business owner. It doesn't stop. You can't say, okay, I've gotten to this point. Now my networking is done. Now I'll stop updating my LinkedIn profile. Now I won't update my resume. It doesn't work that way. It's a continuous work that we have to just make a part of our strategy. The same way that we work in that job cycle when we're seeking jobs, we have to work to keep going so we can get the next opportunity.
And Imani, if I could add one thing to that, right? It's important, and a lot of this demographic, the 40 under 40 demographic, talks a lot about mentors and finding the right mentor. But I think that's a challenge these days, to find one person who can advise you on everything, right? On your career, on business, on family, on life. And so I really like the idea of a board of directors, so that you have a group of people who you can go to. And so I may not ask my dad about real estate advice, but he may be great on career advice, where I have someone else who I go to about investment advice or go to about personal issues. And so really thinking about, as Angelina talked about, putting together a board of directors, a group of people who you can go and bounce ideas with and get advice from, people who really know you and people who you trust, but don't put so much stock in a single mentor.
I love that. I mean, it's almost like having a buffet of mentors who you go to for different kind of expertise versus kind of putting all of your fate, in one perspective. Angelina, you just mentioned, pivoting during COVID and growing your business. How has the pandemic kind of shifted your brand goals and your business goals?
So, there were those moments, I have to be honest. I was on the road a lot in 2019, and it felt really good to rest and to take a step back. And I think I don't know a single person in my circle that hasn't had to do a reset and a shift and look at, are the values that I had maybe prior to COVID the values that I still want? Is this the lifestyle I want to maintain? But in slowing down, there's that old adage, sometimes to go fast, you have to go slow at first. It gave me a great opportunity to really sit down and be strategic. So now, and that's how I was able to make that awareness of, here I am spending a whole lot of time doing cold pitches. Well, historically, all of our business has come from referrals. Am I checking in with my network? Am I going back to past clients and upselling them into new products or new services that we have? And that really was important for me to think about. Although we're all on computers, I'm zoomed out sometimes, Google Meeted out sometimes, I still have to have the virtual coffees, catch up, connect with people, send the handwritten notes, take it back to I used to do that early in my career, take it back to the old school methods of engaging with folks and checking in. And that has made a world of difference.
I love that. And I love what you said in terms of like having the time to do the audit on, do I want to go back to this? What part of my old life do I want to revisit? What part of my old life, am I actually better without? I think during this pandemic, we've all had a lot of time to think. And, Troy, some people have realized they actually want to pivot their career. They want to do something completely different. So what advice would you have for someone who's looking to pivot their career? And then part two of that question is, what kind of talent are companies looking for that really can stand out and break through in a really competitive market?
Thanks. And I think something that we talk about at Amazon is this idea of raising the bar. Right. And so how are you operating in your current role that you are moving things to the next level? And the second part of that is, how are you able to communicate that? So companies these days are really looking for someone who are problem solvers and have the ability to add value to a team. And that's what you need to understand, is what your value add is. And so there's a lot of conversation about, how do I take my career to the next level? Well, you want to build off of results. And I think that's what Angelina was talking about when you're upselling your clients. Well, you can do that internally at your job to say, hey, here's what I've been able to produce. And if I'm given more responsibility and more resources, I'm able to move to the next level. The other thing that I think that really this generation is blessed with is the opportunity to leverage technology. So in the old days, you couldn't get a national following in a day or in a week or in a month. But now you have the tools where you can get your voice heard, where you can show and demonstrate your creativity, where you can build a network, where you can sell your services. All of that you can do as part of the work that you want to do on the side. But if you're doing that on the side, you can make the case to your current employer or to future employers that you were able to deliver results. And so this is really a question of results. It's before we used to talk about your skills, right? List your skills on a resume, and the more skills you had, then that's it, right? But now we talk about what are the results that you were able to produce, whether that was in your work or whether that was on the side.
Wow. I wish I had a notepad. I'm definitely going to have to run this back. These are so many great tips. And I think, Angelina, I really want to talk to you also about entrepreneurship. You said something so really riveting in terms of you were doing the cold calling, it wasn't working. Then you took a step back and you thought, wait, I have these relationships with these people. So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are looking to increase their clientele, secure more deals? What tangible kind of skill sets do they need to kind of get that deal through the door?
Yeah, a combination of things. So one, we talk about value. We brought that term up a couple of times. We talked about results throughout this conversation. Really be clear on your product and service and how you deliver value. That is first and foremost. So that testimonial piece that Troy talked about earlier, knowing how to tell the story of your wins and your successes is really important in any role or any capacity you are in. Being able to share how that's making a difference for, if you're working within a company, the company's mission, if it's your own company, your company's mission, that's really key. And then I also think that as business owners, sometimes we can get so bogged down in the work, and we're doing the work to keep the business afloat. But when we think about growing and we think about scaling, that means carving out that time to be really strategic, to network. One of my best mentors, who's actually in the BE 100, brilliant business owner, shared with me that sometimes as a CEO, if all you do is make the call that day that's going to land you your next big contract, that's more valuable than you filing things away or organizing your Google or doing the task, right? What's most important is you thinking about what are the key things that's going to drive my business forward every day. And often our relationships are what drives our business forward. So that means that when you're tired and you don't, I have so many things on my to-do list. Do I go have that virtual coffee or physical coffee if you're meeting in person again? And the answer is yes. You do need to carve out that time to build those relationships to keep your business growing.
And, we've talked a lot about all the positive attributes and what can happen with a personal brand, but let's also talk about, I guess, the other end of the spectrum, right? Sometimes you need to repair your personal brand. So Troy, going to throw it to you and then circle back with Angelina. What advice would you give to someone who needs to repair, upgrade, elevate their personal brand?
Great. Well, I think that's a good question, because I want to start with what a brand is not. Right. I think a lot of times people are thinking you have to have your logo, you have to have your hashtag, you have to have all these things that get in the way, because you can have all of those things and still not have a brand, right? Because you're not communicating your value add and your value. So I think the first thing is to understanding, what are we talking about? The other thing, I get this question a lot is, well, do employers have the right to look at my social media account? And they do, and they will. Right? So whatever you're posting on Facebook or Instagram or what have you, that is a part of your brand. And so you have to make the decision, especially if you're using your full name as the handles for those social media accounts. They are going to look at that and consider that as part of your portfolio. And so be mindful of that and what you keep public and what you keep private. I think that's thing one. Thing two is, I really want to encourage this generation to experiment. Too often, if you want to be a writer, go ahead and post on LinkedIn or post on Medium and see what the response is to your writing, right? And so don't overthink it. And I think that if you're trying to repair your brand, then you have to flood the zone with quality content that shows up first on search engines, as opposed to the other stuff that you don't want to share. And I think you have to be comfortable at this point deleting or taking down posts, right? And this stuff lives forever. And the things that you were posting in high school may not be the things that you want folks to see now. And so I think that you have to be very deliberate and inspect what is out there about you, and then be deliberate about cleaning that up if you need to, and then producing more content so that people see positive sides of you versus potentially negative sides.
I love that. Angelina, do you have anything to add just in terms of elevating or repairing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best tip I can give is that repairing your personal brand begins with being proactive. We all hope that nothing ever happens where we get called out or we're quote unquote canceled or we've done something that maybe is unfavorable. But unfortunately, these situations do occur and there are mistakes that we all make. We're all human. However, if you've done no work on your brand and no one knows, the quality of the work, the value of the results that you're driving, if no one knows any of that about you, then when something does happen, the damage is much greater. So I think, for instance, a lot of companies got pushback from from Twitter across all different platforms for putting out statements or having some sort of response to the incidents, the tragedies of last year, and not having ever spoken up ever before or having real issues with how their employees were being treated within the actual company. And there's going to be pushback for that, right? And that's because they hadn't been consistent. The more consistent you are, then when something does occur that didn't work in your favor, or maybe you just made a mistake, less damage is done. So I think we all have to make sure that we are working hard and have a strategy around our brand before something even happens.
I love that. I think the strategy piece and not being so knee-jerk reaction makes all the difference. So I'm gonna circle back with another question about social media, because I think there might be folks out there who are like, where do I even start in terms of building this personal brand in a digital landscape? Do I only post when I'm on a panel? Am I only posting my personal, enjoyments? Troy, what would you say is the balance in terms of, social media specifically, how you can kind of still shine through authentically, but also promote your personal brand?
That's a great question. I think you start by focusing on one or two where you really want to put your energy. I think a lot of people try to have too many and then put the same content across multiple platforms. That doesn't do well across multiple platforms. And so my thought on is you don't have to win on every platform, but you do have to decide the one or two that you focus on, and then you have to double down on that. And I've chosen just LinkedIn and Facebook as the two that I spend the time on, because I think those best communicate the work that I do, whether that's around diversity and inclusion or real estate or technology. I think those two work for me. And the more I've tried to build a following on Instagram, I just didn't stick with it. And so I think that goes back to what Angelina was talking about before, is that authenticity. And so if you try to contort yourselves to be on so many different platforms that are not really a fit for you, I think it's not going to work. And so the other thing is, I think you can be strategic. There's no reason why you shouldn't have a content calendar for your LinkedIn as if you were a business, even if you don't have a business, right? There's no reason why you shouldn't take the time to have your friend use their fancy phone to get a professional headshot and take photos of what you're doing. And then to understand that that is telling a story, right? So you're not only posting, but you are communicating and engaging with other friends and other colleagues and people who you want to be connected with. And then I think you are really strategic about who you try to connect with, particularly on a platform like LinkedIn, where when you're reaching out to people, you have to be clear about why you're reaching out. And I get a lot of people who don't introduce themselves and say, hey, I'm applying for this job, can you give me advice? But I don't know anything about them, have any connection with them, and they didn't introduce themselves. And so that's where that really, what you do best in testimonial is a good way to start, to introduce you when you want to make that connection. And I think that's even more great with COVID, because some people have a little bit more time, or are on these platforms a little bit more time, and a little more willing to have a virtual coffee than they otherwise would have been to try to do that in person. And so I think making that introduction and telling who you are up front will help you be more successful in reaching the people you want to reach.
I love that. I really think that's such a great gem in terms of the reaching out component and what that should be framed like. Angelina, did you have anything to add to that point?
I agree with Troy. There's so many different platforms and you need to, we have limited time, limited capacity, limited bandwidth. So you need to be thoughtful about where you're going to engage and how you're going to engage. I think the other thing that's really interesting is these platforms have evolved so much. So I got my first Facebook account before I was entering college. That's when it first opened up. And now Facebook is in so many households across the US. Now they own Instagram, WhatsApp, the platforms have evolved. Influencers didn't exist when they launched, right? And so I think it's important to just know what your strategy is. Are you here to connect with friends and family? You may have a different strategy or approach that way. Do you want to have some professional gains off of using these platforms? You might have a different approach if that's your goal. So the key thing though is knowing what your goal is and having a plan that helps drive towards that goal and being really clear on that, because you can get very caught up if you don't have that goal. And what do they say? A goal without a plan is a wish, right? So what am I trying to achieve and how am I going to be consistent in the messaging that I put out there to achieve it? The last thing I will just say is I'm a huge fan of 360 feedback. I actually use this all the time when I want to get, we talk about perception, that's the other P. What do people think? I'll frequently go to my trusted circle, my advisors, my mentors, my board of directors, Troy, and I will say, here is my LinkedIn page, here's my Instagram page or my Twitter. When you see this, what comes to mind in terms of my areas of expertise, in terms of what you should know me for or come to me for, and get that feedback from your circle and make adjustments. Don't be afraid to change your approach as the platforms are changing either.
And Imani, one thing to add to that, right? A winning brand is not about the number of followers. And if you understand that the people who are most successful is that they find a niche that they're really passionate about and they connect with others. And that at its core is what social media is supposed to be about. And so I really think that you need to do the homework first before trying to build the brand online, is to understand what niche are you trying to network in and communicate in, whether that's professionally or personally. And again, let that grow authentically, because you already know some people in that niche. And so you can say, hey, let's build this thing together. But don't chase followers, because there are people who, a lot of what we don't understand is that the people who have the most followers have professionals doing this work. They're taking the pictures, they're buying Instagram ads, they're doing all this work. And so don't try to keep up with the Joneses. It's really about people will follow you because you're adding value on something you care about and they care about. And so don't follow followers.
Wow.
And
one
more thought on that, because Troy triggered something in me that is so good. I always tell folks that what you're doing online should echo what your plan is offline. So if an online presence is not helping you to drive back to your revenue goals, or say you're seeking a promotion, then you need to shift your online strategy. So definitely not having a huge follower account may not help with your goal of promotion. So that shouldn't be why you're creating content. And you should consider that as well.
No, that's such a great point in terms of, what's really going to move the needle, and also answering the question, like, why am I doing this? I want to go back to this board of directors, because I think there's a lot of folks out there who are looking for their own board of directors, looking for mentors. Can you both share how you have kind of identified mentors in your lives and kind of generally what your board of directors looks like?
I can kick that off. So in every season, I add new mentors or advisors based upon what my goals are. So for example, when I was first launching a business, I needed, but my network was all from corporate. I worked in corporate for 7 years prior to launching a business. And I had to find a network of business owners who could put me on to who's the right lawyer that I need to speak to, who's the right accountant, all the resources that I needed. What are the city organizations that I need to know about? And they became part of my circle of advisors, of mentors. As my business launched and got from one, or as it grew, then I needed a new circle who had experienced growth at the level that I was experiencing. So I think you should always be auditing and seeing who else do I need for the unique challenges that I'm going through. Actually, recently just did an Instagram whole story about mentorship. I think one thing that folks get wrong sometimes is when you're cold pitching a stranger and trying to engage them in mentorship, you want to make sure you're really clear on what you're trying to gain from connecting with them, because your time is valuable, right? If someone's going to mentor me, I want to make sure that they really are the right person that I should be spending time with. So I'm researching them. I'm using the internet as that's at my disposal to learn as much as I can and see, what do I see in this person? Do we have value alignments? Are our goals aligned? Have they done something I really care about? And if I don't know them, so it's much easier if you do know the person already, but if I don't, then maybe I'm not starting off and saying, hey, invest in me, mentor me, let's meet every month. I might start off and say, can we have a 30-minute conversation and build a relationship? So right now I have a circle of mentors that's quite large. And I will say, all of those relationships started out just from those initial conversations and the relationships built over time. And that's how you grow their investment in you.
Yes, I think that's all right. And the other piece that I want to underscore, right, is that the mentor-mentee relationship has to be mutually beneficial. It is not about you coming up to this person and saying, I need this, I need this. I would go to receptions in DC all the time and people would say, hey, can I get your card? And then that was it, right? So it understanding what Angelina is talking about is you need to do your homework before you approach that person. First thing you need to do is communicate that you see what they're doing, you understand what they're doing, you're understanding what they're about, and that you want to learn, right? Because most people want to be helpful and to train you, but they want to know that you at least did the basic homework first. The other thing is what I like to call a warm connection, right? So if you know somebody who knows that person, then ask them to introduce you. But again, that person needs to be able to communicate exactly why you think you want to connect with the person who you want to be your mentee or your mentor. And don't start by asking them to be your mentor. That is a heavy lift for someone, particularly those who are very senior in your career. And so take it slow and say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I want to learn about. And here's how I think you can be helpful. And a lot of times I will do intro calls or with people who say they need help. And at the end of the call, I'm not sure what they're asking me for or asking me to do. And so I often have to say, okay, that's great, you want to do this, but how can I help? And so I think that you should have a clear ask for help on that call or in that conversation. And you should be able to communicate that so that that person can be most helpful to you.
I love that. So would you recommend, you had your first informational, you're talking to someone who you hope eventually could become your mentor. Do you think that it's appropriate to have an ask during that first conversation? What do you guys think?
I think so. Otherwise, you've wasted both of your time, right? And the ask doesn't have to be a big ask, right? Can you be my mentor? The ask may be, can you recommend some books that would be helpful or some things that I should read? Or can you recommend another person that I should talk to about this to learn more? Or, can we schedule something next quarter so that we can have a follow-up meeting after I work on these to-do items? So it's important to ask that person how they like to communicate and how often that they are interested in communicating. And particularly professional people or business owners, they're pretty clear about what amount of time that they're willing to give and how they're willing to use their time. And so I think that should be an upfront conversation. And so I think you should have an ask, but not an ask that's too large on the first meeting.
I agree. I say low commitment asks are the best on a first date. You're probably not asking that first date to marry you. I'm sure that doesn't work out for most people. So beginning with a low commitment ask, or really if you're working on a project, if you're trying to gain insight to an organization, very targeted, specific, can you give me feedback here? And then just the other piece I'd share on mentorship that I hear from folks in my circle all the time. A lot of times when people reach out for mentors, they're seeking highly visible people. But even in this era of social media where folks' brands may make them stick out, I don't want to discount that there are some folks that are not as visible for their own personal reasons or various reasons that have so much to offer. One of my key mentors runs a $100 million organization and he has 200 Instagram followers, right? So he's not highly visible, but every time we meet, I'm in business school. I have a notebook out. I'm taking pages of notes. He gives me homework. And then also mentees follow up. I do the homework and I bring the homework to the next session. And that's how I get that continued investment.
I love that. I think that you all provided such tangible, helpful advice. I want to wrap with one last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who wants to just really elevate their personal brand starting tomorrow, where should they start? What's the one piece of advice you'd give them after you've given us so much advice today?
So I can start. It's really about getting to know you. Most people think they know themselves, but when you ask them, tell me a little about you, and they say, oh, well, I'm interested in politics. Well, that doesn't tell me anything about you, right? So it's really about having to do a dive deep. And so I think the first place that folks should start is really with a list of their values. What do you truly, truly value that makes you who you are? And I think once you start there, then you're able to communicate your brand, because again, the brand is just a story about your values.
I echo everything that Troy said. So I will say that I have for my business a mission, vision, and value statement, and we have a strategic plan. But I also have always had one for myself as well. And I revisit it, right? The way you might do a vision board every year, you should also revisit what is your personal mission? What are your values? What is your strategy? Does that plan that you might have created 2 years ago still match where you are now? And be willing to pivot, be willing to accept. Sometimes it's hard for us to accept if our goals or our desires have changed. Lean into it, accept that you're a human, you're able to change, embrace that change. And then what you need to do is make the adjustments to your brand accordingly, right? So if I thought that previously I wanted to be a CMO, now I think I want to launch my own business and I'm moving into that new direction. Now I need to go back to my 3 Ps. How am I going to deliver value? How do I need to shift perception of folks around me who might have seen me as a corporate entity or corporate employee to now see that I can be successful as a business owner? And who are the people in my network that I need to help amplify what I'm doing in that next season of my career?
Angelina, Troy, thank you all so much. This was incredible, and I enjoyed talking with you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.